All right, hey everybody. Welcome to the Building and Scaling with Feeds webinar. Thanks so much for joining us. I know you're all pretty busy, so we really appreciate the time you're taking to join us on this webinar and get a guided walkthrough of our brand new tool, Feed Editor. And during this webinar, we're hoping to take you through this new tool and teach you a little bit about how to build and scale your dynamic campaigns using feeds. We're going to show you some tips and tricks on how to build with feeds and answer any questions you might have during the webinar with the little Q&A chat box. Feel free to enter those as we go along, and we'll read them out at the end of this presentation and follow up with anything we don't get to at the end of the hour. This webinar will be recorded, so for anyone who doesn't get a chance to join, or if you'd like to reference it again, we're going to add it to the Celtra webinars ad gallery on our website, and we'll send that link out in a newsletter after the webinar is over. So joining us today, we have Ukiah Pearson, a creative product specialist here at Celtra. He's going to give us the actual demo of the Feed Editor tool and talk a little bit about how you can use it to scale your dynamic creatives. We also have Ashna Katari, our senior product manager, who's here to answer any questions you might have about Feed Editor. And I'm Nikki Gertner, your product marketing manager, here to host. So a quick refresher about dynamic content feeds for anyone who's new to building dynamic creative and maybe has never used a feed before. You might be asking, why should I use feeds? And the answer to that is that feeds are going to help you build hundreds or even thousands of different dynamic creative outcomes, whereas maybe your production efforts were slowed down by having to build individual creative variants separately. You can use feeds to build a lot of creatives all at once. And so feeds are made up of conditions and values that you set to help generate those creative variants. And we're going to show you a little bit about how you set up that feed and then connect it to different elements inside your creative to source different content or change the entire ad experience from the ground up. And here you just see a little example of how you can use a feed to change individual elements or change up the entire experience completely. So today we're going to talk about Feed Editor, which is a platform upgrade in the Celtra platform. And we feel that using this tool is really going to help optimize your workflow. We hope that after this webinar, you get a good sense of how you can use Feed Editor to compose creative variants at scale, make updates in bulk, and eliminate any back and forth you might have been having with spreadsheets before Feed Editor was introduced. And just a quick refresher that Feed Editor is a brand new tool in the platform, which you can access today. We're really excited to show you how it's going to work, how you'll be able to use the built-in QA intelligence to make sure there's no errors, how you can use it to make updates in real time. And we'll show you all the different ways of the different types of feeds that you'll be able to set up. We really feel that Feed Editor is going to help every moment of your campaign, from the setup to the actual feed editing to production to the end when it's time to actually review those creative variants and approve them for distribution. And I think that should be it. So I'm going to throw it over to Ukiah to actually show you the exciting part of this webinar, which is Feed Editor.
Like Nikki said, I'm going to show you guys how to actually build within Feed Editor, but I thought before I get started, I could show you what we're actually going to be building. So this is Campaign Explorer showing the creative that we're going to be working on today. So this is a single creative with about 100 different dynamic creative variants. So these are all based on location. So you're going to be seeing a dynamic headline up here, as well as dynamic product descriptions with the product shots in the back. So if you kind of go down here, you can see all these different variants that are built off of the same single creative. So I didn't have to build these all out separately. It's one kind of template creative that is then fed with the feed, and then it produces all these different creative variants. So you can see that kind of speeds up production quite a bit. So from there, I think the first thing we'll do is hop right into the campaign we're going to be working out of. So this is the campaign that I had set up previously. The creative is already set up here. We'll be going to that a little bit later, but to start us out, we're going to actually be setting up the feed that's going to be informing the creative itself. So from the campaign view, which is what I'm in right now, we're going to go over to this little data tab right here. And for anybody that's familiar with setting up the traditional way of building feeds within Celtra, same kind of workflow here. You're going to click into data. But now, if you're familiar with the workflow that existed before, you would build it in a new template here, or new table. And now you have this option to do new custom feeds. So this is where you're going to be accessing Feed Editor itself. So we're going to click on this. And then you have a few options. So this is kind of your startup wizard. Either have the option to use Feed Editor itself, source from an external URL, or use a real-time API feed. Today we're going to be focusing mostly on Feed Editor and external URL, but this is also available to you. Same kind of workflow as before, where you're using a JSON file, and we have a support document about that too if you're interested in using real-time feeds. To start us out, I figured we'd use this external URL way of sourcing your feed. So this is essentially means that you have your feed built elsewhere. So if you had previously built a feed in the old workflow where you're using either Google Sheets or Excel to export a CSV file, this is where you're going to be importing that feed from. So go ahead and click external URL. And then we're going to import a URL from where that CSV file is hosted. So I'm going to click over to Google Sheets here. You'll notice that I have set up this demo feed already. This is about 100 rows. I have conditions of city, state, and country, and then I have my values, my headline, my image URLs, and the text that's feeding into those particular product slides that we saw a little bit earlier. And then I have this additional ID number column. Just wanted to show you guys that you don't necessarily have to use all of the values within your feed in your creative. This is kind of just an identification number that I have for myself to keep myself organized within the feed. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my feed is hosted publicly. So if it's not hosted publicly, really important to make sure that it is set to public. Anybody on the web can access it. I'll go ahead and copy this URL. I'll go back into Feed Editor. I'll paste it here. And just a real quick note, if you guys are setting up this kind of feed in this sort of way, if this is set to not be public, so say I just have it set to specific people and click that same URL and I paste it in here, this will give you an error saying that you're not able to upload it. So that's kind of an indication that your CSV is probably not public. So I'll go ahead and switch this back to being public so we can use it. And then again, just update this and then confirm. So once we confirm, we're given the ability to select if it's a first matching feed or if it's a random feed. So my feed here has several conditions where I have multiples. So I have several San Francisco, I have several New York, Chicago, and so on. So I want to set this to be a random rule-based feed because it essentially means that when I find a match, a conditional match, if I get to a user that's in San Francisco, California, it will then randomly choose between these 10 rows here. If it's a first matching feed, what it would do is go from top to bottom and choose, as it says, the first matching option. So if I found a person in San Francisco, I would only ever show this row of content. Super important to keep the distinction between those in mind. So this is going to be a random rule-based feed. And then I also have the option to automatically refresh or not. I'm just going to disable that for now. And then if I scroll down a little bit, I'm able to see my conditions if I want to. These are collapsed by default, so you're not necessarily presented with the type of conditions you're using. But the important part here is that you need to define what your values are. So the headline here, I just want to say that this is text. I also have the option to choose image, video, landing page, HTML, or choice. Say this is text. This is an image. Image here as well, and then the rest of these are just text, so I can just click through these really quick. And then once I'm done there, I can choose save. So I'll do that, and then we'll say external URL feed, and then we'll save that. So now you're essentially done. This is completed feed. You can now connect this to your creative, and then you can see the end product result that I showed you at the very beginning. For right now, I'm going to go back in and actually show you guys Feed Editor. But before I do, I figured you can also make quick edits to this either by clicking on this header here, which will take you to the externally sourced CSV file. So this will take you back to Google Sheets. Or you can go in here to refresh if you've made a change to your feed, or you can go into settings to redefine either what your values are, what type of value it is, if it's an image, text, video, whatever it may be, or if you want to change it from first matching, if you want to automatically refresh or change it to random, whatever you want to do. With that said, I will go into the actual feed editor, the actual good part of this demo, and click confirm. So I have feed editor selected. I'll click confirm. And then we're presented with the same option to choose between first matching or random. Again, we're going to use the same feed for the feed editor demo. So I'm just going to select random, and then I'll select continue. We'll call this feed editor. And we'll continue. So once we're done, we'll be put directly into the feed editor tool. So this is what it looks like. It looks fairly similar to most spreadsheet editors that you're familiar with. But the nice thing about this is that it's purpose-built for actually building dynamic feeds. So you have really nice things like error validation. You have all of your conditions listed for you in these columns. It's really, really simple to set up, so I can kind of show you guys how to get started. So to get us started, you have the option to choose between all of the available conditions, which is super nice because before you had to kind of, enter the condition manually. You had to make sure it was formatted correctly. This is super nice because you can just select whatever type of condition you want to use. For this, we're going to do city, state, and country. And we can just start filling these out. So I'll put in San Francisco. And you'll see that it automatically populates the city as you start typing, and then the same thing for California. We can just select California here, and then we can do United States. And you can copy and paste here. So typical to the way you'd expect to in something like Google Sheets, you can select a bunch of rows and just paste them all in here. I'll just fill out maybe New York as well. And the United States as well. For this sample, since I'm all in the US, you wouldn't necessarily need this country column, but I wanted to show you guys just to illustrate the point that if you have a campaign that's running in several countries, you can put them all in the same feed. You could select the different countries. Say, you're somewhere in South America, you could have Mexico, or you could have Canada also in here with the state and city listed as well within the conditions. And then we'll go ahead and build out our values. So within values, you have the option to choose between text, image, video, landing page, HTML, or choice. For this first one, we're going to call this headline, just like we had in our original feed. We'll say that that's text. We'll call this image 1, or we'll call this product 1. It's fairly useful when you're naming your values to make sure that it's relevant to the actual type of content that it's representing, so that when you're into your creative and you're assigning everything, you make sure that there's a really easy correlation between the name of the value and the actual content that it's informing. So we'll say that that's an image. We'll make sure that, and you can undo as well, just Command Z, fairly familiar to you. So if you make a mistake like I just did, you can go back in and undo it. So we'll call this product 1. I might even add an image to it. So I'm going to go ahead and edit this one to add image, just so we can be super clear about what it is. Call this product image 3, and then call that an image. We'll do product description 1, and then so on for the rest of them. And then finally, we'll just do our ID number as text. So feed editor is meant to be used as a tool to build out hand-built feeds. If you're using some sort of third-party data partner, you would essentially just use the external import like I just did, because more than likely they're going to give you a URL to the exported list of data. So for feed editor, we're kind of intending for this to be used for hand-built feeds. Feed editor can be used to build feeds up to 1,000 rows. So you'll see as I scroll down, I go to 100, but I can add 900 more rows to get up to 1,000 rows. More than likely, if you build a feed this big, you're going to either probably be using a querying software to build this for you, or a third party, like I mentioned earlier. If you get to be above 1,000 rows, it's more than likely you're not building these by hand. But you have the option to do both. So if you want to do more than 1,000, I have a couple of clients that do tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of rows in their feed. You can still do that with the external import. So I'm going to start filling these out. This first value, I'll say, see what's San Francisco. And then we'll get onto our images. So the really nice thing about Feed Editor is that it allows you to really easily manage your assets. So I'm going to go to my desktop here, and I'm just going to throw in a file of assets. I think I have an asset in there that isn't supported, so I'm just going to grab a few of these. So I have some JPEGs and PNGs. I probably have another file formatted here that it didn't like, so I'm going to just grab a bunch of these, drag these in, and then they will upload into the platform. This is super nice, but because before, when you were building out feeds, essentially you had to get a publicly hosted URL, and you can still do that. You can still put in a URL for an image here, and it will upload it for you into the platform. But it's really nice to just be able to drag and drop them from your desktop or from a shared file within your company to the product, and then they're immediately available to you. So when I click on this dropdown, now I have all these images available to me to use within my feed. And it's really nice to be able to see the image in line with the rest of the row, just so you can kind of contextualize, okay, this is the headline with this image, this product description, and so on. So you can really visually match them up. Another nice thing that I noticed is if you zoom in on one of these rows, these assets maintain their quality, so you can more easily, if you have small text like I have on mine, I can see that this says Indy Lee, and then I can make sure that I select that and then correspond my product description to the product itself. I'm gonna go ahead and fill these out really quickly. Just for the sake of the demo, these probably aren't gonna match between descriptions and images, but you guys kind of get the idea. And then I'll call this one Rose Hibiscus. Call this one and then we'll just give this one an ID number. So this is essentially how you're going to build out your feed. You're going to be populating your rows with your content, headline, product image, things like that. Really quickly, before we get too much further into this, I want to review a couple of the other conditions that we didn't touch on. So you have the option to use custom audience names. So this is going to pull from custom audiences that you have available within the campaign. So if I go ahead and add this to my feed, you'll notice that I had set up a couple of demo kind of audiences within the campaign to show you guys. So it will show you only the audiences you have set up within this campaign, or if you have audiences that are account wide, these will appear here as well. I'll go ahead and delete that one. And then, so derived audience name, sort of the similar thing. So audiences you have available to you within the campaign. You have the option to choose things like temperature. So when you select the row here, double click on this, you have the option to kind of slide the temperature, choose between Celsius or Fahrenheit, choose if it feels like that temperature or if it physically is that temperature, and then apply. So you can do a range here. You also have the option to do precipitation. This is essentially like the condition that it is outside. So if it's sunny, cloudy, rainy, snowy, hailing, or foggy, you can say, okay, so for San Francisco, California, when it's sunny, I want to show this. San Francisco, California, when it's rainy, I want to show something else, some other set of content. Along with that, we also have wind, if it's windy or not. That's pretty simple, just a yes or no. I also have the option to do date. So what's really nice about this is previously when you set up date, you didn't have the option to do a date range, but now you have the really simple option to do an entire day range. You can just do a single day. So if it's just the 18th, if it's just today, San Francisco, California, today, I want to show this content maybe for, tomorrow through the end of the month. I want to show a different type of content. So you can really easily put in date ranges in here, which is super useful. Same thing for time. So you'll have the option to kind of move through the slider and decide what time you're trying to serve that particular set of content. Placement is very similar to audience, so I've set up a couple of demo placements here within the campaign that are going to be available to you within the feed editor. And then same thing for the supplier, so if it's available to you within the campaign, again, it's available to you within feed editor. Zip, very similar to what we've set up here, and then language. Really nice about this is that it has a drop down, so you can just kind of go through and choose your languages. But you can also type them in here. So if it's, for example, Spanish, it'll pop up for you just like that. And then while we're at it, I figure we can also just review the available value types as well. So again, we have text, video, image. Video works the same way as images do. So you can just drag and drop videos into the platform, and then they'll be available to you as selectors right here in the dropdown. Landing page, so this is for dynamic click-throughs within the platform. If you want to, say, for example, you have 3 hotspots within the creative. one on each of these products, and then a dynamic hotspot that goes along with it. So when you're showing this product, the hotspot coordinates to the product. So when the user clicks on it, they're directly taken to that product rather than, you know, just taken to the landing page of the website, for example. HTML, so you can do HTML coding within the feed to show different types of, you know, bold or italic or things like that. And then choice is the way that Nikki was talking about a little bit earlier, to do completely different creative executions within your campaign, even in a single creative. So for example, if you have one creative that's built out with those 100 different variants, like I was showing you, you could have several different choices to show different types of layouts within that same creative to kind of mix it up a little bit and to suit particular audiences or something like that. So I'm going to fill out, I guess we can just kind of skip over filling this out by hand in the interest of time. What I'm going to do now is show you guys the import ability. So obviously the idea is that you would fill this all out by hand, you know, up to as many rows as you need for your campaign. Actually, one thing I want to show you guys really quickly. So if I, for example, have a bunch of rows for New York, and then I get down to, say, row 29, where I can't necessarily see it from the top. What's really nice about the error validation within Feed Editor is that if you put in something down here that's just not spelled right, for example, or not what it's expecting, it will give you this little red dog ear to show you that there's something wrong within this row. And it's really nice that it shows this up top as well. So if you do have a feed that's very, very long, you can't necessarily see all of the content just within your screen, you're able to see, okay, I know that there's an error within this row. I can kind of scroll down, find the error, and then correct it. So I'll change it to New York, or, you know, whatever the state may be. Same thing for values. So for example, an image value column expects to either have an image populated into it or have a URL for an image populated into it. So for example, if I, again, just type nonsense, it will show this red dog here too. And if I hover over this, it will say, please choose an image from the drop-down menu or upload. So use a URL or just drag and drop an image into this. Kind of the same thing for URL. So for example, if you do a dynamic landing page in here and you, again, just put a bunch of nonsense, it will tell you that it's not a URL and it's going to prevent you from saving it all. So really, really easy way to see what's wrong within your feed before you end up going ahead and saving it and wasting a bunch of time. So I'm gonna go ahead and save my feed as it is right now. And then we're gonna move on to showing you guys the import function. So again, idea is that you fill this out by hand, you take your time, make sure that all the rows are correctly populated with the conditional match and then the content you are showing along with that conditional match. But for the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and use this import function. So import function is really, it's sort of similar to importing from an external URL like I showed you at the very beginning. But the difference here is that you're actually importing it into Feed Editor rather than just referencing that external source. So again, since Feed Editor supports up to 1,000 rows, you want to make sure that your feed that you are pulling into the platform is 1,000 rows or less. So you can either import a CSV file, which I have on my desktop, so I can go ahead and drag and drop this into the platform. And it will find it, confirm, and then again, it'll have you set up your values. So headline, image, 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 and then text for the rest of them. You can also do this the same way with the URL, similar to the way we did in the beginning, and then it will populate everything into the feed editor. So you'll see that within the feed here, these were all URLs. So if I paste in a URL or if I import a URL from an external source, it will upload all the assets into the platform so that I have the ability to choose from them in the dropdown here. And then obviously populated all of the headlines and conditions in here as well. So I'll go ahead and save that. Custom feeds, same member ID, let's see. Let's just delete that altogether, see if that saves. Cool. So we're gonna go back to our campaign now that this is all set up. I have a few feeds in here now just because I did the one from the external source. I set this one up yesterday. You can delete this. So you'll notice that when you have set up your feeds, you're kind of shown how many creatives are using this. Currently, I have 0 creatives using this, so I'm just gonna delete this one. Once I connect this to the creative I'm about to show you guys, I'll come back in here and show you how it tells you which creatives that it's linked to. But again, these are the same feed. This one's just pulling it from the external source, and this one is built actually in Feed Editor. We'll go into my creatives, and I'll go into Builder. Okay, so this is all set up. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the actual building of this creative. I will touch on really quickly the fallback component. So if you guys are familiar with dynamic content, or even if you're not, the fallback component is super helpful and important when you're building out excuse me, creatives using feeds, because essentially what it does is it gives you a container, which I'm going to double click into this. You have an available side and you have a not available side. So the idea with this is, on the available side, you'll be building all of your content with the dynamic signals from the feed. So, you know, your headline, your product image, so on and so on, whatever it may be for your use case. And then on the not available side, it's going to be a static version that's not connected to any type of feed. For my example here, this is the exact same creative, except the content is static. It's not pulling in from any type of feed. So you just see new products from Hannah, and then the slideshow here, we have rose hibiscus on this slide, and then the other products on the other slides. But for the available side, excuse me, we're gonna actually connect these to the feed. So I'm gonna double click into this, select my text component, and then within the info panel, I'll scroll all the way down here, and there's an option to pull from a data feed. So if you don't have any data feeds set up in the data tab, this option won't be here. But if you have any feeds set up within a campaign, you will see this option here if it's for text. So we're gonna click enable. And then in the drop down here, we have the two feeds we just set up. So the feed editor and the external, they're the same feed. So for this one, I'm just gonna select headline. Actually, this is my product title 1. So within this dropdown, it's only going to show you the type of content from your feed that's relevant for this type of component. So, you know, this is the text component. It's only going to show me text value columns from the feed. So I'll select title 1, and then we'll go to second slide, enable data feed, title 2. Same thing for this third slide, title 3. Okay. And then we will go into our layers. And then we're just gonna find our images, because this is kind of layered on top of each other. Find our first image. And similar thing here, so with the image selected, you'll go into the info panel and again, scroll down. From your source assets, instead of having it being pulled from a file that you've uploaded into your assets panel, we're gonna go into select feed. And again, this will give you the option of all of the image value columns from a feed that you've built within the same campaign. So feed editor demo, we'll do image 1. And it gives you a little clue of which column it's pulling from in the feed, feed editor demo image 1. And then we'll do the same thing for 2 and 3. Okay, and we'll go ahead and save that. And then last thing here is we want to change the headline. So we'll go up here, and again in the info panel, scroll all the way down, go to our feed editor demo and click headline. So that's the dynamic headline that we set up within the feed itself. And now, if we go back to our campaign, and we do preview all to look at Campaign Explorer, we're shown essentially what I showed you guys in the very beginning. So same exact creative built out with 100 different variants. So you have the option to select the different signals here. So when you're using Campaign Explorer, you want to make sure that you're selecting all the signals that you want to see. And then, you know, you can scroll down and see the different variants. Just for fun, what we might do is go back to the campaign itself and then add a couple of additional sizes just to show you guys how easy that is. So within our units and pages, we can go ahead, and now that this is all connected to the feed and all good, all set up, we can just duplicate this, the entire size. We'll change this to maybe a 480 by 320. And then we'll duplicate this again, maybe do a 300 by 250. And then one last creative, we'll do maybe a 320 by 480. Okay, save. And then again, we'll go into Campaign Explorer. Again, just the same creative. It's the exact, you know, we're not having to build out 100 different variants. We'll do preview all. And then now that I build out those additional sizes, I have this option to select sizes as well. So I'll again populate all my locations. And pretty simply, I've gone from a single creative, not dynamic, to essentially 300 or 400 different variants, different sizes. So I can toggle off, I'll toggle off the one that I was originally building. So maybe just toggle off that one so we can see some different sizes. So we have the 400, this is 480 by 320. And then if I scroll down even further, we can get to the 300 by 250 version. So pretty simple. Like Nikki was saying in the beginning, you can make changes to the feed now, and then the updates will automatically reflect on the creative. So for example, if we want to go back in, and while we're here, you can see that we've connected this to a feed, or connected this to a creative. So it says creative's using, it says one creative is using this feed, and if we click on this little caret here, it'll tell us which creatives are using this feed. Obviously in a campaign this small, it's not super hard to find the creative that it's linked to, but if you end up building a campaign that has 7 or 8 different creatives or even more, this becomes really useful. And then if you click on this, it'll take you to the creative that it's connected to. A couple of important notes with that is if we go into this feed, and for any reason, so since this is connected to a creative, it'll give you a little 1 on all of these values. So for example, if we built out a very, very complex feed that has maybe 20 different value columns that we're planning on using in different creatives, which is a great efficiency tool if you're going to be using feeds in that way, you may see, this value column is used in 3 creatives, this one's used in 1 creative, this one, and so on and so on. If for any reason you make a mistake, or if you decide that you want to delete this column altogether, you can delete this, but it will give you this warning. These changes will unlink objects being used in one creative within your campaign. So really important to keep that in mind, because if you do that, if you completely delete a column, or if you reassign a column to a different type of content. So for example, if this is set as an image and for whatever reason I set this to text, it'll give you the same type of warning. So if this is a live campaign, a live creative, making these types of changes will immediately reflect the creative that's running. So it's super important to remember those things so that those kind of mistakes don't happen. And again, you can undo things really, really easily to, again, save and make sure that the live campaign is okay. It's not serving creatives that are populating text that say, 1320-09C. But super, super important to keep that in mind. So I think that's pretty much what I had. Do we have any questions from the chat?
Thanks, Yukaya. Yeah, we do actually have a couple questions. I'm actually going to promote Ashna to a speaker as well. First question is, how does Dynamic Editor handle updates set to go live at different times? Is it possible to force a time zone, say for a reminder for a TV premiere?
Yes, so you can use the time condition that is, we call it time client. So if Yukaya can show that really quickly. So we have two types, right? Time of day UTC and time of day client. So I think for this use case, you'll use this condition and set the time range or the exact time to localize content based on the region. And in addition, maybe if you want, you can also use location. So if you want to show some content in San Francisco from 3 to 4 p.m., you can use both time and location together.
And additionally onto that is for something like a TV show, you might even want to throw on a date condition. So you're essentially saying, on May 8th in San Francisco at 8 p.m., this campaign is going to run for an hour when this show is about to start, or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question, but feel free to reach out if you have any follow-ups. The next question is location filtering also available in GDPR restricted countries?
Yes, so location doesn't need any user information. So it's just location, and any user that is, for example, here in San Francisco will be shown that content. So it is not affected by GDPR.
Perfect, thanks Ashna. Next question is, can custom fonts be uploaded to be used in conjunction with feeds?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you want to upload a custom font, what you'll do is there's kind of like a backdoor method of doing this. And again, there's an article on the support site that shows you how to do this. But essentially how it works is you will build a video creative. And I can just show you guys very, very quickly. And then once you're in the video builder, you have the option to upload a custom font. So once we're in this, once it gets spun up, this might take a second since I'll have to upload a video. But essentially the idea is you can go to the end card is typically what I do. Go to the end card, you'll select the text component, the text area of the video on top here. You'll have a little bar right here that gives you the option to choose the font. When you're in the font selector, there's an option to choose custom, and then it will give you a dialog to upload your font. You need a WAF and a TTF format to do this, and also you have to be an admin on the account. If you're a builder, you don't have the access to actually do this within the account, so something to know.
Cool, thanks guys. Next question, if a condition field is left blank, will the platform take that to mean any of the possible conditions are applicable?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can use this intentionally within feeds to do some pretty interesting things. So for example, you have blank condition rows or the condition rows are blank altogether. You can build a feed that is just like this with literally no condition, and what this will do is it will randomly, you'd have to obviously again set this to be random rule selection so that it's not just choosing the first row, because in this case every row would be a match. So this would serve randomly, or if for example you want to do something very specific, you could do something like this, where this would show, if you're in San Francisco, you're shown this row. If you're in San Francisco in the US, if you're in San Francisco, California, you know, that's probably not going to be a matching condition, but you kind of get the idea. You'd be shown this. Or if you're, actually, let's do it this way. Yeah, this is a much better example. So San Francisco, you're shown this content. If you're in California, anywhere, you're shown this content. If you're in the US, anywhere, again, you're shown this content. So for something like this, since you have a bunch of US cities and states, you'd probably want to put this at the bottom. So you're saying, you know, if you're in the United States anywhere, you probably put that at the bottom again, and then you're shown that content. That is also where the fallback component comes into play. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend having the bottom row being like an any condition match, because that does still depend on the creative being able to access this spreadsheet. So if for whatever reason the creative can't access the spreadsheet, it's probably best to just build it with a fallback component so that you're showing something regardless of what's going on with the user, where they are, what kind of conditional match they have. But yeah, absolutely. So if you leave a condition blank, it will kind of just ignore that. And then in a system where you have several conditions like this, it will pick the next most relevant condition.
Thanks, Kyle. Just a couple more questions. What kind of reporting data is available from dynamic feeds? For example, is it possible to review performance of 2 image variants within a specific location?
Ashna, do you have any updates on that? I know that we're, for creative relevancy, we have a very specific ability to pull reporting in Report Builder. I think we do custom reports for feeds right now, but I think that's something we're working on.
Yeah, so that's something we are working on, and I can get back to that question. We do have a feed-based reporting, so any feed condition-based reporting in the works, but it's not available just yet. But I'll check the ETA on that.
And we have done some campaigns where we do custom reports. So if you're thinking about running a type of campaign where you need reporting on 2 different images, just let us know and we can set up a custom report.
Thanks, guys. And to the person who asked that question, you know, feel free to reach out to us and, you know, we can talk offline about that. And so one more question, would it be possible to use the tap to calendar component to add the time of a TV show on different time zones using the dynamic feed? So I think the question here is can the feed be hooked up to the tap to calendar component so that the event that gets added to the calendar is different in different time zones, showing the correct time based on the time zone? And I think the answer there is the kind of the same setup that we would use using location, a combination of location and time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As long as both of those conditions are being used, then I believe we'd be able to make sure that that event contains the correct information based on the person's location and the time zone they're in.
And the way that I kind of tend to think about time-based targeting is that when the user, the creative will be served to the user when it's that time for them. So you don't necessarily have to worry about time zones or kind of like when somebody's seeing the creative, because if you have a time signal or time condition within your feed, that user will see the creative at the time when it's that time for them, if that makes sense.
Great, thanks. I think that makes sense. I think that answers all our questions here. If you have any other last minute questions, feel free to submit them now. And thank you all so much for everyone who has submitted some questions. We really appreciate you, following along and paying attention and asking questions that are important to you and the types of campaigns you're trying to run. So while we wait for any last minute questions, just as a reminder, as you start playing around with Feed Editor, you can always visit our support documentation. It's just on our regular support site. Just feel free to type in Feed Editor and you'll get taken to that corresponding article. Great. So I don't think we have any more questions, though if you do think of one later on, you can always reach out directly to me. It's just nikki@celtra.com, or feel free to reach out to support. Our wonderful technical support representatives are standing by and are eager to answer questions about Feed Editor. Just reach out to support@celtra.com as you usually would. And I think that's coming up on the end of the hour. So I think we'll be able to give you guys all 10 minutes back of your day. Again, thank you all so much for joining the Feed Editor webinar. Hopefully you have a better idea now as to how to use Feed Editor to help scale that dynamic creative that you're building and really focus on, the important aspect, which is building the best creative you possibly can.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Bye.